Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today. If you're the kind of person who really loves to understand how systems actually work behind the scenes, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're cutting through the noise and going straight to the raw data that governs India's environmental clearances. We're going to decode exactly who holds the real power over environmental oversight across the country by digging into a seriously fascinating dataset. It's a precise, structured look at the status, tenure, and validity of India's environmental authorities, specifically the SEAC and SEIAA. And I promise you, the patterns we found hidden in these dates are incredibly revealing.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. We'll start with a quick welcome to Parvesh, track the SII and SEAC, decode their 3-year tenure, look at the status across the states, and finally, investigate the missing committees.
All right, Section 1. Welcome to Parvesh, the CPC Green Portal. Now, before we even start analyzing our data, we really need to understand where it comes from and, why we should trust it. The data we're unpacking today is sourced directly from the CPC Green Portal, which is widely known as Parvesh. This isn't just some random website, it's the official, authoritative digital infrastructure for environmental governance in India. It was designed, developed, and hosted by the National Informatics Center and officially owned by the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change. Basically, think of this portal as the central nervous system for the country's regulatory approvals. It's the single hub where all environmental, forest, wildlife, and coastal regulation zone clearances are processed and tracked. So the data we're pulling here? It's the absolute ground truth of India's environmental administration.
Moving to Section 2, tracking SEIAA and SEAC via the Constitution database.
So if you navigate through the Parvesh portal, right under the Notifications and Orders section, you'll find a very specific, crucial database. We're looking at a document titled Status of Constitution of SEIA and SAC. But before we look at the dates, we really have to understand the immense power these two bodies hold. SEAC stands for the State Expert Appraisal Committee. They are essentially the technical brains of the whole operation. When a localized development project, say a new factory or a regional highway is proposed, it goes straight to the SEAC. They run a rigorous technical appraisal process to evaluate the environmental impact. Once that's done, they pass their recommendation up to the SEIA, the State Environmental Impact Assessment Authority. The SEIA is basically the muscle. They hold the ultimate regulatory power to legally grant or reject that clearance. Having both these bodies actively constituted is a strict legal requirement. Without them, local projects literally cannot break ground, and the scope here is massive. We're looking at exactly 37 distinct entries covering every single state and union territory in India.
Section 3. The 3-year tenure. Let's decode the life cycle.
Now this is where the data gets really interesting. If you look closely at the reconstitution dates and the expiry dates for every active committee on this list, you're going to hit this one universal number, 3. We did the math across the board, and the data reveals a super strict, universally applied standard. These committees don't just hold on to power indefinitely. They operate on very precise 3-year cycles. And this is actually a brilliant way to guarantee that technical expertise is frequently rotated, which prevents administrative stagnation and ensures fresh eyes are always looking at state-level development projects.
And this comparison beautifully illustrates that point. Look at the data we pulled for Haryana. The committee was reconstituted on December 24, 2025, and its term expires exactly on December 23, 2028. Now check out Odisha, reconstituted just over a week earlier on December 16, 2025, and its expiration is locked in for December 15, 2028. It is a perfectly rigid 3-year mandate down to the exact day -1. This strict timeline ensures that regular rotation happens like clockwork.
Let's move to our next slide. Because these 3-year terms are tied to their individual constitution dates, the expirations don't just happen all at once. It creates a staggered, continuous pipeline of administrative renewals. For example, looking ahead through mid-2026, West Bengal's term is set to expire in May. In June, both Mizoram and Gujarat's SEAC-1 hit their 3-year mark. Puducherry follows in July, and Sikkim in August. This shows us that the Ministry of Environment literally has to be in constant motion, managing this rolling schedule so there are no gaps in governance, and so the appraisal process for new projects doesn't completely stall out.
Section 4. Status across Indian states. The big picture.
So we know they're on strict 3-year cycles, but how is the country actually doing right now in keeping these committees active? Let's zoom out. Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is the overwhelming level of compliance. Out of the 37 states and union territories tracked, a whopping 34 currently have the status of present. That means they have an active, fully constituted committee within their valid window. Only 3 out of 37 have the status of absent. This confirms that for the vast majority of the country, local technical appraisal processes are legally sound and totally capable of handling development requests.
The main takeaway here is that the system is highly active, and we can see just how far into the future this pipeline stretches by looking at some newly updated committees. Take Meghalaya, for instance, just reconstituted in January 2026. Because of that rigid 3-year rule, their validity stretches all the way to January 2029. Haryana and Delhi are similarly locked in well into late 2028. These newly minted committees mean the environmental appraisal power in those regions is fully secured for years to come without interruption.
Finally, Section 5, the missing committees, identifying the outliers.
Well, a data dive is never quite complete without looking at the anomalies, is it? Let's pivot to examine those 3 missing slices from our chart. Parvesh explicitly flags Chandigarh, Uttarakhand, and Nagaland with the status absent. But what's really vital to notice here is exactly how long it's been since their terms lapsed. Chandigarh expired most recently on May 2, 2026. Uttarakhand has been expired since October 3, 2025. But wow, look at Nagaland. Their committee's term expired way back on October 19, 2023. That is a massively long time to be marked absent in a system that absolutely relies on these specific authorities to process environmental proposals.
Which brings us to our final, and maybe most important, thought for today's explainer. We've seen Parvesh's incredible digital tracking, we've decoded the strict 3-year life cycle, and we've talked about the immense regulatory power the SEIAA and SEAC wield over the appraisal process. But seeing those absent states leaves us with a really compelling question. With these strict tenures, what exactly happens to the pipeline of environmental clearances when a state's committee remains absent, sometimes for years? Since these bodies hold the sole legal power for localized development, does development just stall entirely? Is the legal appraisal process effectively paralyzed there, or does the burden magically shift somewhere else? It's a critical question about how administrative data hits the real world, and honestly, it's exactly why keeping a close eye on the Parvesh portal is so essential. Thanks so much for joining me on this data dive, and as always, keep questioning the data.